Jennifer began her PhD last year at King's College London, having previously completed her BA at Royal Holloway and her Master's at St King's. Jennifer's current research examines the timing of early modern pregnancy in both medical and literary sources between 1550 and 1660. Her thesis explores how ideas of pregnancy and legacy can be used to conceptualise identity and, by extension, navigate ideas of the past, present and future. Her paper today is called The Womb of Time, Untimely Birth in Shakespeare's Richard III.
I was going to wear my jacket, but I think in light of the weather, I think I'll just have to go like this. This is part of one of my chapters for my PhD. I apologise that it's not more theatrical. It's kind of ended up more medical and literary, but actually in light of Isabel's paper earlier, it kind of works quite well in thinking about how would you play Richard III and how do you situate him in his own temporality in the play. Okay. In Othello, Iago refers to the gestation of his revenge plot. There are many events in the womb of time which will be delivered. Like the conception and execution of intellectual ideas, Iago's use of a metaphorical womb exploits the womb's essential requirement of time in order to properly gestate. Time must unfold the workings of Iago's strategy and the narrative of the play, in the same way that time must work its power over pregnancy. Only proper gestation and patience can bring these things to fruition. Iago's language is particularly noteworthy because most early modern iconography of time took the form of an aged man, neither virile nor generative. Iago's divergent image of time as fertile with opportunity offers an essential starting point for explorations of early modern pregnancy. Accordingly, this paper draws attention to the significance of correctly and incorrectly timing pregnancy and birth. Taking Iago's temporal insight into the early modern womb as a foundation, I will highlight the central importance of the timing of birth in Shakespeare's Richard III, showing that the implications of being sent before my time extend beyond Act 1, Scene 1, and shape our reading of the play. Pregnancy is an inherently temporal condition, and time played a particularly important role in early modern understandings of gestation and birth. Although I don't have time to expand in detail upon these ideas today, I want to make it clear how important timing and concepts of temporality were to the way in which pregnancy was understood and experienced. For example, the specific timing of conception was believed to have implications for the sex and disposition of a fetus, and the time of quickening also marked an important milestone in the progression of pregnancy as the fetus began to move. The period of lying in after the birth was also crucial for women to cleanse themselves before they were allowed back into the community, and this period fluctuated depending on the sex of the child. In this paper, I will focus on the specific time and timings of gestation and birth before going on to consider Richard III in light of these temporal frameworks. In Richard III, Richard's bodily deformity is read by the characters as proof of his untimeliness and consequently his wickedness. Time and Richard's body are both physically distorted in this play, as his experience of the pace of time appears to fluctuate. His birth and early youth are described both fast and slow, premature and late. Although it remains unclear if Richard is to blame for his untimely birth because he himself is inherently abortive and evil, or if his treacherous character is the result of and reaction to this unfortunate and mistimed birth. By looking at the mistimed circumstances of Richard's birth, we gain new insight into his villainous behaviour, his quest for rebirth as the King of England, and his crippled and impotent legacy. I want to begin by examining attitudes towards proper and improper timings of gestation and birth in early modern discourse. Research undertaken in 2013 suggests that 268 days is the average length of gestation, but for many early modern practitioners, any time between 7 and 11 months was considered good and viable. Whilst contemporary physicians, such as the hugely influential Jacob Ruff, thought the physical creation of the child within the womb was fairly straightforward, the final time of delivery was less certain. Ruff's influential midwifery text, The Expert Midwife, translated into English in 1637, asserts that it takes 45 days for the basic shape of a child to be formed, although it would not possess sense or feeling until 90 days after conception. On the 270th day, the child would hasten and come forth to the birth. Ruff's assertions are based upon Aristotle's ideas of epigenesis, which argues that offspring grow as parts budding out from one another, rather than being fully formed at conception. And one of the images on the handout, actually all the images on the handouts, show you pictures from Ruff's text. It's the creation of the fetus as very most subtle and slender threads or hairs do grow and spring up, bred by the motion of heat, which doth form, frame, and distinguish the most principal members. And here they are, slightly bigger on the screen. My friend the other day pointed out to me that she couldn't actually figure out where the fetus was growing, and it's this creepy image that freaks me out every time I look at it, but you can just make out the shape of the head, and there's the back here. Time is an active agent in this gestational process, ensuring the timely shaping of the child within the womb, and its role is continually emphasised in this early stage of development, as Ruff notes, in no uncertain terms, time doth form such shape. Despite this seemingly uncomplicated chronology of gestation, experts remained unsure if 270 days was the correct time for children to hasten to the birth, and speculated that some times were dangerous and incompatible with a safe delivery. Though untimely birth could refer to those delivered tardily or hastily, unnaturally or malpresented, or could be used to indicate illegitimacy, my focus today is on attitudes towards those born prematurely or in the wrong month. Early modern writers struggled to explain a gestational variability that was seemingly only present in humans. Whilst animals followed seasonal times and fixed terms of reproduction and gave birth at least within a day or two of the allotted term, humans, the most perfect of all the animals in the world, had no fixed time for reproduction or birth. To explain this inconsistency, writers and practitioners often turn to agricultural metaphors, which more accurately describe the unpredictability of human pregnancy. For instance, Ruff likens the length of gestation to the alterability of grapevines and argues that both personal and environmental factors could influence the ripeness of a pregnancy. Do we not know, not only in the same country and field, but also of the same vine, grapes sometimes 6 weeks ripe before their ordinary season, and others not till a month after? So we see women brought to bed 6 weeks and 2 months before, and sometimes as long after their ordinary term. Though Ruff refers to an ordinary term of gestation, his confidence in a fluctuation of up to 4 months highlights the relative inadequacy of early modern predictions. This inaccurate view of gestation was in part due to flawed calculations which included incorrectly identifying the date of conception and inconsistencies in using either lunar or solar calendars. Human gestation was consequently viewed with a tremendous sense of elasticity. Though the window of delivery was incredibly broad by modern standards, superstitions still surrounded certain timings. Whilst children could be born between 7 and 11 months, only 4 of these terms promised the arrival of a healthy child: 7, 9, 10, and 11 months. Though it was possible for a child to be born at 8 months, it was considered extremely dangerous as the child was exceedingly weak and vulnerable at this time. At 7 months, the fetus had reached perfection and moved to position itself within the womb as it was ready to be born. Those too weak or too underdeveloped to be born at this time forestalled their birth in the 7th month and removed themselves to another unspecified place of the womb in order to rest and recuperate and prepare for the birth in the 9th month. The 8th month was viewed as undesirable as it was proper to Saturn, an enemy of all things which receive life. The astrologer, that's not the worst thing you read in these medical texts, I tell you. The astrologically inopportune moment of the 8th month meant that while offspring could be born at this time, their chance of survival was slim, as they were too enfeeblished. Whilst modern understandings of the terms abortive and abortion most frequently connote ideas of the deliberate loss of a fetus or the natural miscarriage of a child, both of which were not uncommon in this period, early modern usage of the term also referred to premature and deformed births. Richard is twice called abortive in the play, and this description simultaneously points to both his disfigured and untimely status. Famously sent before my time, Richard embodies both the enfeeblished body characteristic of a premature or abortive birth, as he struggles with a withered arm and a hunched back, and the melancholic and adversarial temperament of one born under Saturn. Though I don't have time to adequately address other depictions of Richard's birth in other accounts from this period, I'll briefly mention that Richard III differs from these texts in one crucial way. Whilst Richard is sent before his time in Shakespeare's play, he is presented as grossly over-mature in the other historical narratives of his life. For instance, John Roos asserts in History of Kings of England that Richard was retained within his mother's womb for 2 years and emerging with teeth and hair to his shoulders. Whether premature or over-mature, both Shakespeare and the other sources seem to approach Richard's birth as a metaphor for his villainy. Just as his exaggerated deformity has been read as a means of propaganda for the subsequent Tudor dynasty, Richard's untimely birth can be read as further reinforcing Richard's inherent unnaturalness. Whilst his birth is seen by the other characters as proof of his innate treachery, particularly Queen Margaret, who proclaims, "Thou that wast sealed in thy nativity, the slave of nature and the son of hell," Richard sees his untimely birth as a crime committed against him for which he must avenge himself. "Since the heavens have shaped my body so, let hell make crooked my mind to answer it." Consequently, his birth offers just as much tension and conflict in the play regarding his natural villainy as his deformed body does. In Shakespeare's text, Richard's prematurity offers crucial insight into interpretations of his psyche. The importance of his birth narrative and the implications of its temporality are made evident by their prominence at the very start of the play. Richard claims that he is not shaped for sportive tricks, nor made to court an amorous looking-glass. He is rudely stamped and lacks love's majesty, and these physical imperfections are temporally inflicted. He is curtailed to this fair proportion, cheated of feature by dissembling nature, deformed, unfinished, sent before my time into this breathing world, scarce half made up. This opening segment of the play offers one of the most pronounced theatrical references to contemporary beliefs regarding the importance of timing pregnancy, as Richard directly addresses the impact of the timing of his birth upon the development of his body. In this scene, Shakespeare unambiguously highlights the powerful influence of temporality upon gestation, and Richard's fervent belief in this concept hints at its acceptance, at an acceptance of this connection within early modern culture. As the play opens, Richard relates to the audience the temporal shift that has taken place in the royal court since the events of Henry VI, Part 3. Richard's previous life, which had been characterised by the active and fast-paced nature of his brother's rebellion, has been supplanted by a time of leisure and peace. This temporal transformation not only impedes Richard's plans to usurp the throne, the change of pace also personally offends Richard's biological tendency for haste, as he asserts, "I hate the idle pleasures of these days." Temporal confusion surrounds Richard. Though he is the product of a rushed gestation, his body is only capable of a stuttering pace, as he claims, "Dogs bark at me as I halt by them." Whilst Richard's birth classifies him as hasty, his subsequent deformity makes him slow. In this sense, Richard's untimeliness references not only the premature and unfortunate circumstances of his birth, but also his existence out of time. As such, Richard's experience of time and pace jars with the natural and melodious piping time of peace that characterises his brother's court. Rather than enjoying the pleasurable delights of now, the passage of time only reflects and reinforces ideas of Richard's own deformity. "I have no delight to pass away the time unless to see my own shadow in the sun and to descant on my own deformity." The passing of time does nothing but taunt Richard, as the sun acts to highlight his deformed shadow. The past holds nothing but blame for his deformity, and the present does nothing but ridicule him. Consequently, the future is all that Richard can depend on. "Plots have I laid, inductions dangerous, to set my brother Clarence and the king in deadly hate the one against the other." Richard's salvation from his deformed past and uncomfortable present lies in the carefully shaped plots and prophecies which promise the downfall of his brothers and his own ascendance. Only Queen Margaret, Richard's Lancastrian adversary, recognises Richard's designs upon the future and tries to warn against it. As the events of Richard III show, Richard is eager to change his own personal narrative by advancing his right of birth by becoming king. In order to do this, Richard must be reborn. In the early modern period, the event of birth was not perceived as the natural outcome of fetal maturity. Instead, as Elaine Hobby notes, birth was understood to be the deliberate action of the infant in response to the strangling nature of the depleted womb. However, in Henry VI, Part 3, and to a lesser extent in Richard III, Richard repeatedly highlights the malevolent role of his mother in causing his deformity, shifting blame onto her. Although it is only Richard that suggests this, "Love forswore me in my mother's womb, to shrink my arm up like a withered shrub, to make an envious mountain of my back." The Duchess of York is eventually driven by Richard's villainy to claim, "Oh, I that might have intercepted thee by strangling thee in my accursed womb." Here, Richard finds vindication for his unsupported assumption that his mother deliberately mistimed and impaired the circumstances of his birth, and his actions in the play seem to be in response to this so that he can seek their ruin that usurped our right. As critics such as Janet Adelman and Robert N. Watson have argued, Henry VI, Part 3 depicts a metaphorically revised birth scene in which Richard fantasises a terrifyingly forceful birth for himself, not forced from the womb, but forcing himself out of it. Whilst contemplating his plan to usurp the crown, Richard notes that he is like one lost in a thorny wood that rends the thorns and is rent with the thorns, seeking a way and straying from the way, not knowing how to find the open air, but toiling desperately to find it out. Torment myself to catch the English crown, and from that torment I will free myself, or hew my way out with a bloody axe. I feel like hewing my way out of this room with a bloody axe at the moment. Not because it's a bad atmosphere, it's just so hot. The imagery of this violent rebirth clearly draws on the image of an early modern child freeing itself from the womb with its conscious play on pubic hair, strangulation, expulsion and bodily escape. By hewing out a new narrative future away from his traumatic past, Richard reasserts temporal control over the malevolent womb and his distorted body. By reclaiming the timing of his rebirth, Richard is able to prevent himself from being expelled prematurely, or conversely from being strangled if kept in utero too long. As Marjorie Garber observes, premature, protean, filly and functionally toothed, Richard here hews out a historical path away to the crown and to the chronicles. Though temporal agency is denied Richard at his birth, his metaphorical regeneration serves to reclaim the past and reshape it for the future. Despite Richard's attempts at reclaiming temporal agency through his violent rebirth, he appears to offer no thoughtful consideration of his own biological and dynastic legacy. A crucial omission from Shakespeare's text is the presence of the three historical children Richard fathered in his lifetime, an illegitimate son and daughter, John of Gloucester and Catherine Plantagenet, and a legitimate son with Anne Neville, Edward of Middleham, Prince of Wales. This Prince Edward appears in earlier historical accounts, including John Roos's favourable Roosrow, created during Richard's reign, which describes him as son and heir to the most high and excellent Prince King, Richard III, and his most noble lady and wife, Queen Anne. Yet few contemporary records of Edward of Middleham survive, since he died around the age of 10. As Edward of Middleham predeceased both of his parents, it is easy to see why he might have been excluded from Shakespeare's text, since he would have been an unnecessary plot device, and his existence would have problematised the foreshortened time scheme of the play. However, his omission significantly affects the characterisation of Richard, as the inclusion of a son and heir would have undermined Richard's declaration in Henry VI, Part 3, I am myself alone. Ian Frederick Moulton contends that Shakespeare's Richard gives no thought to progeny, but the play offers two references to a potential Ricardian heir. The first occurs in Act 1, Scene 2, when Richard tries to woo Anne. Appalled by his romantic audacity, Anne violently curses Richard and his hypothetical future wife and child. If ever he have child, abortive be it, prodigious and untimely brought to light, whose ugly and unnatural aspect may fright the hopeful mother at the view, and that be heir to his unhappiness. Unwittingly, Anne curses herself in her own womb as she accepts Richard's proposal of marriage a mere 177 lines later, and though Anne's potential fertility is never mentioned again, her reference to an untimely abortion mirrors Richard's own deformity. In the context of children as a biological legacy, this curse is brutal in its threat to displace Richard's disfigurement to the future. The second reference occurs in Act 4, Scene 4, as Richard attempts to gain Queen Elizabeth's support for a potential marriage between himself and his niece Elizabeth of York. He swears that his designs on her daughter are entirely noble, yet his reference to future heirs becomes grossly inverted as he tries to remove himself from their biological conception. In your daughter's womb I bury them, the princes, where in that nest of spicery they will breed cells of themselves to your recomfiture. Despite Mark Thornton Burnett's suggestion that Richard seeks to use a womb as a temporary home for the next Ricardian generation, Richard's language distances himself from the paternity of these potential children who seem to be little more than clones of the princes. In doing so, he appears to redirect the usurped dynastic line back towards the rightful claim of his murdered nephews and the correct hereditary timeline. Ultimately, Anne's curse of infertility comes to fruition as Richard is unable to replicate himself, and the final suppression of Richard's legacy occurs with the promise of Tudor heirs, as the victorious Richmond vows to claim Elizabeth of York for himself and supplant himself in Richard's place. Oh, now let Richmond and Elizabeth, the true succeeders of each royal house, by God's fair ordinance conjoin together, and let their heirs, God, if thy will be so, enrich the time to come with smooth-faced peace. As Richmond's antithesis, Richard's infertility seems appropriate, and without a son and heir, Richard becomes the barren monster of Anne's curse. Richard's birth appears to offer an origin for his villainous actions, yet, with an unnatural beginning, a foreshortened end, and no heir, Richard remains isolated from the past and future. Ironically, it's only through the written histories of Richard that he achieves any kind of afterlife or legacy, as the premature conclusion to Richard's life brings a final caesura to the temporally and physically distorted figure of Richard III and his tyrannous reign, offering hope for an enriched and perfected time to come. Hopefully this paper has highlighted that the implications of Richard's birth extend beyond Act 1, Scene 1, and this affects our wider understanding of the play. Richard's untimely beginning is not simply an early narrative explanation for his physical deformity, but rather a vital starting point for Richard's interaction with the past, present, and the future. The abortive and temporally distorted birth that Richard notes at the beginning of the play has far-reaching repercussions for Richard's usurpation of the crown and his fruitless legacy. In Richard's case, the womb of time is sterile. There is no potential future. Thank you.